Sunshine from Raven and Sunshine. Today I am alone. As you can see, Raven was and is still very busy today. She is going to be in the next video, but I decided to go ahead and film one of the serial killers that I'm going to be talking about today without her, just so that way we can go ahead and catch up and get this out to you guys. Today is March 17th and it is a Monday. Also, it is 8:26, so happy St. Patrick's Day to all of the people who celebrate. I really don't celebrate it much, but I know that there's some people that do, and it is actually a holiday. So with that being said, just happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone who celebrates, and for all the people who are having fun today, I just hope you guys stay safe. And let's get into none other than Dean Croll. Croll, I think. I'm not too sure how you pronounce his last name, so I'm just going to say Croll. Before I start, I do want to give trigger warnings to anyone who is sensitive to the topic of murder and other things that come with that. And I just like to give that warning because I know sometimes people click on things and they're unaware of what type of video it's going to be. So before I even start, that's why I like to give that warning. This is just for March. Also, for the people who do not. Okay, guys, sorry. So this is just for March, like I was saying. So we're not going to be extending it to April, I don't think. But if you want us to and you like this, just let us know. Also, for the people who are new and you would like to subscribe, just know we don't do this content regularly. This was just supposed to be for March, so there are other videos that you can go watch if this isn't your cup of tea. But with all of that being said, I'm rambling at this point. I'm going to go ahead and get into this story. So all of my information that I do have is from Wikipedia. If I say anything incorrectly or there's details that I do end up missing once we get finished talking about it, you are more than welcome to let me know in the comment section. And with that being said, let's get into it. So, Dean Arnold Croll. He was born December 24th, 1939. He was an American serial killer and sex offender who abducted, raped, tortured, and murdered a minimum of 28 teenage boys and young men between 1970 and 1973 in Houston and Pasadena, Texas. He was aided by 2 teenage accomplices. I'm so sorry, guys, that I have to keep pausing. The last place that I left off was he was aided by 2 teenage accomplices, David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley. Okay, I'm so sorry, guys. The accomplices that helped him, their names were David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley. The crimes, which became known as the Houston mass murders, came to light after Henley fatally shot Croll. Upon discovery, the case was considered the worst example of serial murder in United States history. that was just the summary. Let's get into his early childhood life. It says Dean Arnold Croll was born on December 24th, 1939, in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The first child of Mary Emma Robinson and Arnold Edwin Croll. Croll's father was strict with his children, whereas his mother was markedly protective of both her sons. Their marriage was I'm so sorry, guys. Their marriage was marred by frequent quarreling, and the couple divorced in 1946, 4 years after the birth of their young son, Stanley Wayne Croll. Mary subsequently sold the family home and relocated to a trailer home in Memphis, Tennessee, where Arnold had been drafted into the United States Air Force after the divorce, to allow her sons to remain in contact with their father. Croll was a shy, serious child who rarely socialized with other children, but at the same time displayed concern for the well-being of others. He was also markedly sensitive to any form of criticism or rejection. At the age of 7, he suffered an undiagnosed case of rheumatic fever, which was not recognized until doctors found Croll had a heart murmur in 1950. As a result of this diagnosis, Croll was told to avoid PE classes in school. Croll's parents attempted reconciliation and remarried in 1950, subsequently moving to Pasadena, Texas, a suburb of Houston. However, the reconciliation was short-lived, and in 1953 the couple once again divorced, with the mother again retaining custody of her 2 sons. The divorce was granted on amicable grounds, and both boys maintained regular contact with their father. Following the second divorce, Croll's mother married a traveling clock salesman named Jake West. The family moved to the small town of Vidor, Texas, where Croll's half-sister Joyce Janine, I want to say, was born. Croll's mother and stepfather started a small family candy company, initially operating from the garage of their home. From the earliest days of the business, Croll worked day and night while still attending school. He and his younger brother were responsible for running the candy-making machines and packing the product, which his stepfather sold on his sales route. This route often involved West traveling to Houston, where much of the product was sold. From 1954 to 1958, Croll attended Vidor High School, where he was regarded as a well-behaved student who achieved satisfactory grades, as had been the case in his childhood. Croll was also considered somewhat of a loner, although he is known to have occasionally dated girls in his teenage years. In high school, Croll's only major interest was the brass band, in which he played trombone. Croll graduated from Vidor High School in the summer of 1958. Shortly thereafter, he and his family moved to the northern outskirts of Houston so that the family candy business could be closer to the city, where the majority of their product was sold. Croll's family opened a new shop, which they named Pecan Prince, in reference to the brand name of the family product. In 1960, at the request of his mother, Croll moved to Yoder, Indiana, to live with his widowed grandmother. During this time, Croll formed a close relationship with a local girl. although he rejected a subsequent marriage proposal she made to him in 1962. Croll lived in Indiana for almost 2 years, but returned to Houston in 1962 to help with his family's candy business, which by this date had moved to Houston Heights. He later moved in an apartment of his own above the shop. Croll's mother divorced West in 1963 and opened a new candy business, which she named Croll Candy Company. Her eldest son was appointed vice president of the new family firm, with his younger brother Stanley being appointed secretary-treasurer. The same year, one of the teenage male employees of Croll's Candy Company complained to Croll's mother that her son had made sexual advances towards him. In response, she fired the teenager. Now, I do want to stop cussing in general and in our videos, because I know that sometimes once I start, it just keeps going. So I'm really trying hard not to do that anymore. But I do want to let you guys know that I'm very upset with what I just read. Now, I never like looking up the case beforehand because I want to react in real life time with you guys as I'm reading these stories. And just reading this right now and finding out that his mother, instead of doing what was right, chose to fire the teenager and I guess brush off the fact that what he said didn't matter. I don't know. That's crazy, guys. I've never heard of this story before, and I've never heard of this man before, so all of this, like I said, is new to me, and I'm reading it and finding out what happened in real life time, like you guys are. And yeah, that made me very upset because it's just so crazy what lengths some people go to when their children are in the wrong, you know? So she fired the teenager, and that was that. Croll was drafted into the United States Army on August 10th, 1964, and assigned to Fort Polk, Louisiana, for basic training. He was later assigned to Fort Benning, Georgia, to train as a radio repairman before his permanent assignment to Fort Hood, Texas. According to official military records, Croll's period of service in the Army was unblemished. Croll, however, reportedly hated military service. He applied for hardship discharge on the grounds that he was needed in his family's business. The Army granted his request, and he was given an honorable discharge on June 11, 1965, after 10 months of service. And guys, during this time when he was serving, he was 24. Reportedly, Croll divulged to some of his close acquaintances after his release from the Army that it was during his period of service that he had realized that he was homosexual and had experienced his first homosexual encounters. Other acquaintances noted subtle changes in Croll's mannerisms when in the company of teenage males after he had completed his service and returned to Houston, which led them to believe he may have been homosexual. Following his honorable discharge from the Army, Croll returned to Houston Heights and resumed the position he had held as vice president of Croll Candy Company. Croll's former stepfather had retained ownership of the family's former candy business, Pecan Prince, following his divorce from Croll's mother in 1963. A competition between the two firms was fierce, as had been the case in his teenage years. Croll increased the number of hours he devoted to the candy business to satisfy an increasing public demand for his family product. In 1965, Croll Candy Company relocated to 22nd Street, directly across the street from Helms Elementary School. Croll was known to give free candy to local children, in particular teenage boys. As a result of this behavior, he earned himself the nicknames of the Candy Man and the Pied Piper. The company employed a small workforce, and he was seen to behave flirtatiously towards several teenage male employees. Croll is also known to have installed a pool table at the rear of the candy factory where employees and local youths would congregate. Okay. In 1967, Croll befriended 12-year-old David Owen Brooks, then a 6th grade student and one of the many children to whom he gave free candy. Brooks initially became one of Croll's many youthful companions, regularly socializing. Okay, guys, so it says Brooks initially became one of Croll's many youthful companions, regularly socializing with Croll and various teenage boys who congregated at the rear of the candy factory. He also joined Croll on the regular trips he took to South Texas beaches in the company of various youths, and later commented that Croll was the first adult male who did not mock his appearance. Whenever Brooks told Croll he needed cash, Croll gave him money, and the youthful began to view Croll as a father figure. Upon Croll's urging, a sexual relationship gradually developed between the two, beginning in 1969. Croll paid Brooks in cash or with gifts to allow him to perform fellatio on the youth. Brooks' parents were divorced, his father lived in Houston, and his mother had relocated to Beaumont, a city 85 miles east of Houston. In 1970, when he was 15, Brooks dropped out of Waltrip High School and moved to Beaumont to live with his mother. Whenever he visited his father in Houston, he also visited Croll, who allowed him to stay at his apartment if he wished. Later the same year, Brooks moved back to Houston by his own later admission, and Brooks began regarding Croll's apartment as his second home. By the time Brooks dropped out of high school, Croll's mother and his half-sister Joyce had moved to Colorado after the failure of her third marriage and the closure of Croll Candy Company in June of 1968. Although she often talked to her eldest son on the telephone, his mother never saw him again. Following the closure of the candy company, Croll took a job as an electrician at the Houston Lighting and Power Company, where he tested electrical relay systems, and he worked in this employment until the day of his death. Between 1970 and 1973, Croll is known to have killed a minimum of 28 victims. All of his victims were males aged 13 to 20, the majority of whom were in their mid-teens. Most victims were abducted from Houston Heights, which was then a low-income neighborhood. Northwest of downtown Houston. In most of these abductions, he was assisted by one or both of his teenage accomplices, David Brooks and Elmer Henley. Several victims were friends of one or both of Croll's accomplices, and others were individuals with whom Croll had himself become acquainted prior to their abduction and murder. And two other victims, Billy Balch and Gregory Winkle were former employees of Coral Candy Company. Coral's victims were usually lured in either one of the two vehicles he owned, a Ford Econoline van and a Plymouth GTX, or a 1969 Chevrolet Corvette. He is known to have purchased for Brooks in early 1971. The enticement was typically an offer to a party or a lift, and the victims would be driven to Coral's house. At Coral's residence, the youths would be plied with alcohol or other drugs until they passed out. And guys, it does say plied, and that is short for supplied. So I just want to let you guys know that. They were tricked into donning handcuffs or simply grabbed by force. They were then stripped naked and tied to either Coral's bed or usually a plywood torture board, which was regularly hung on a wall. Once man-clad, I believe I'm saying that right, I'm sorry guys, the victims would be essayed, beaten, tortured, and sometimes after several days, killed by strangulation or shooting with a .22 caliber pistol. Their bodies were tied in plastic sheeting and buried in one of four places: a rented boat shed in southwest Houston, a beach on Bolivar Peninsula. I'm dumb, guys. I'm so sorry. It's Bolivar Peninsula, a woodland near Lake Sam Rayburn, where Coral's family owned a lakeside log cabin, or a beach in Jefferson County. In several instances, Coral forced his victims to either phone or write to their parents with explanations for their absence in an effort to allay the parents' fears for their son's safety. He is also known to have retained keepsakes, usually keys from his victims. During the years in which he abducted and murdered his victims, Croll often changed addresses, however, until he moved to Pasadena in the spring of 1973. He always lived in or close to Houston Heights. Croll killed his first known victim, an 18-year-old college freshman named Jeffrey Conan, on September 25, 1970. Conan vanished while hitchhiking with another student from the University of Texas to his parents' home in Houston. He was dropped off alone at the corner of West Limer Road and South Voss Road near the uptown area of Houston at approximately 6:15 p.m. Croll likely offered Conan a lift to his home, which Conan evidently accepted. At the time of Conan's disappearance, Croll lived in the Harold Turboff Apartments, where he had paid a deposit of month's rent on September 21st. Brooks led police to Conan's body on August 10, 1973, and the body was buried at High Island Beach. Forensic scientists subsequently deduced that the youth had died of asphyxiation caused by manual strangulation and a cloth gag that had been placed in his mouth. The nude boy was found buried beneath a large boulder covered with a layer of lime, wrapped in plastic, and bound hand and foot with a nylon cord, suggesting he had been violated. Guys, this is disgusting. Shortly after Conan's murder, Brooks interrupted Croll in the act of essaying two teenage boys whom Croll had strapped to a four-poster bed. Croll promised Brooks a car in return for his silence, and Brooks accepted the offer, and Croll later bought him a green Chevrolet Corvette. Croll later told Brooks that he had killed the two youths and offered him $200, the equivalent of approximately $1,620 as of 2025. For any boy he could lure to Corll's apartment. On December 13th, 1970, Brooks lured two 14-year-old Spring Branch youths named James Glass and Danny Yates away from a religious rally held in Houston Heights to Corll's Yorktown apartment. Glass was a acquaintance of Brooks, who at Brooks' behest had previously visited Corll's address. Both youths were restrained to Corll's four-poster bed with rope and handcuffs and subsequently raped, strangled, and buried in a boat shed he had rented on November 17th. An electrical cord with alligator clips attached to each and was buried alongside Yates' body. Six weeks after the double murder of Glass and Yates on January 30th, 1971, Brooks and Croll encountered two teenage brothers, Donald and Jerry Waldrop, walking towards their parents' home. The Waldrop brothers had been driven to a friend's home by their father with plans to discuss forming a bowling league, and they had begun walking home after learning their friend was not at home. Both boys were enticed into Corll's van and driven to an apartment Croll had rented on Magnum Road, where they were raped, strangled, and subsequently buried in the boat shed. Between March and May of 1971, Croll abducted and murdered 3 victims, all of whom lived in Houston Heights, and all of whom were buried towards the rear of the boat shed. In each of these abductions, Brooks is known to have been a participant. One of these 3 victims, 15-year-old Randall Harvey, was last seen by his family on the afternoon of March 9th, cycling towards Oak Forest, where he worked part-time at as a gas station attendant. Harvey was driven to Corll's Magnum Road apartment, where he was subsequently killed by a single gunshot to the head. The other 2 victims, 13-year-old David Hillegeist and 16-year-old Gregory Winkle, were abducted and killed together on the afternoon of May 29th. Both were murdered at an apartment Croll rented on West 11th Street. Man, this is so crazy. As had been the case with parents of other victims of Croll, both sets of parents launched a frantic search for their sons. One of the youths who voluntarily offered to distribute posters the parents had printed offering a monetary reward for information leading to the boys' whereabouts was 15-year-old Elmer Wayne Henley, a lifelong friend of Hillegeist. The youth pinned the reward posters around the heights and attempted to reassure Hillegeist's parents that there might be an innocent explanation for the boys' absence. On August 17, 1971, Croll and Brooks encountered a 17-year-old acquaintance of Brooks named Reuben Watson Haney, walking home from a movie theater in Houston. Brooks persuaded Haney to attend a party at an address Croll had moved to on San Felipe Street the previous month. Haney agreed and was taken to Croll's home, where he was subsequently strangled and buried in the boat shed. In September 1971, Croll moved to an apartment on Columbia Street. This address was also located in the Heights. Brooks later stated he had assisted Croll in the abduction and murder of 2 youths during the time Croll resided at this address, including one youth who was killed just before Wayne Henley came into the picture. In his confession, Brooks stated the youth killed immediately prior to Henley's involvement in the murders was abducted from the Heights and kept alive for approximately 4 days before his murder. The identity of both these victims remain unknown. Now, we're going to get to the participation of Elmer Wayne Henley. In the winter of 1971, Brooks encountered Wayne Henley at the two Tronted from Hamilton Junior High School. I'm sorry, guys. He encountered him as the two Tronted from Hamilton Junior High School. He later introduced him to Croll, and Henley likely was lured to Croll's address as an intended victim. However, Croll evidently decided the youth would make a good accomplice and offered him the same fee of $200 for any boy he could lure to his apartment, informing Henley that he was involved in a white slavery ring operating from Dallas. Henley later stated that for several months he ignored Croll's offer, although he did maintain an acquaintance with Croll and gradually began to view him as something of a brother-type person, whose work ethic was admired and in whom he could confide. In early 1972, he decided to accept Croll's offer because him and his family were in dire financial circumstances. Henley said the first abduction he participated in occurred during the time Croll resided at 925 Schuler Street, an address he moved to on February 19th. Brooks later claimed that Henley became involved in the abductions while Croll resided at the address he had occupied immediately prior to Schuler Street. If Henley's statement is to be believed, the victim was abducted from the Heights in February or early March of 1972. In the statement Henley gave to the police following his arrest, the youth stated he and Croll picked up a boy at the corner of 11th and Stewdwood and lured him into Croll's home on the promise of smoking some marijuana with the pair. At Croll's residence, using a ruse he and Croll had prepared, Henley cuffed his own hands behind his back, freed himself with the key hidden in the back pocket, then duped the youth into donning the handcuffs before observing Croll bind and gag him. Henley then left the youth alone with Croll, believing he was to be sold into the sexual slavery ring. The identity of his first victim, Henley assisted in the abduction of, remains unknown. 1 month later, on March 24th, 1972, Henley, Brooks, and Croll encountered an 18-year-old acquaintance of Henley's named Frank Aguirre, leaving a restaurant on Yale Street, where the youth worked. Henley called Aguirre over to Croll's van and invited the youth to drink beer and smoke marijuana with the trio at Croll's apartment. Aguirre agreed and followed the trio to Croll's home in his Rambler. Inside Croll's house, Aguirre smoked marijuana with the trio before picking up a pair of handcuffs Croll had left on his table. In response, Croll pounced on Aguirre, pushed him onto the table, and cuffed his hands behind his back. Henley later claimed he had not known of Croll's true intentions towards Aguirre when he had persuaded his friend to accompany him to Croll's home. In a 2010 interview, he claimed to have attempted to persuade Croll not to assault and kill Aguirre once Croll and Brooks had bound and gagged the youth. However, Croll refused, informing Henley that he had raped, tortured, and killed the previous victim he had assisted in abducting, and that he intended to do the same with Aguirre. Henley subsequently assisted Croll and Brooks in Aguirre's burial at High Island Beach. Despite revelations that Croll was in reality killing the boys that he and Brooks had assisted in abducting, Henley nonetheless became an active participant in the abductions and murders. 1 month later, on April 20th, he assisted Croll and Brooks in the abduction of another youth, 17-year-old Mark Scott. Scott was well known to Croll, Henley, and Brooks. He was specifically chosen by Croll to be his next victim, as according to Henley, he had recently cheated Croll on a deal relating to stolen property. He was grabbed by force and fought furiously against attempts by Croll to restrain him, even attempting to stab Croll with a knife after several hours of abuse and torture, including burning with incense cones. However, Scott saw Henley pointing a pistol towards him, and according to Brooks, Scott just gave up. Scott ultimately suffered the same fate as Aguirre: rape, torture, strangulation, and burial at High Island Beach. Brooks later stated Henley was especially sadistic in his I don't know why, guys. Today I'm just like a little stuttery. I'm sorry. I think it's because I'm trying to like read it as fast as I can because I'm already at 35 minutes, but I'm going to get through this, guys. So it says, in his participation in the murders committed at Schuler Street, Henley later admitted to gradually becoming fascinated with how much stamina people have when subjected to the act of murder. Before Croll vacated the address on June 26th, Henley assisted Croll and Brooks in the abduction and murder of two youths named Billy Balch and Johnny Delhomme. In Brooks' confession, he stated that both youths were tied to Croll's bed, and after their torture and rape, Henley manually strangled Balch, then shouted, "Hey Johnny," and shot Delhomme in the forehead with the bullet exiting through the youth's ear. Delhomme then pleaded with Henley, "Wayne, please don't." Before he was strangled, both youths were buried at High Island Beach. Give me 1 second, guys. Okay, so it continues going on and on with all of the victims that you guys, sorry. I'm gonna go ahead and try to wrap this up as fast as I can because there's some stuff that I have to do, but there was a lot of victims, and this is so sad. Honestly, it's disgusting, and I do blame the teenage boys just as much as I blame him for all of the sick stuff he did to these young boys. And the only thing that I can say, though, is that at some point I do feel a little bit for the boys, and the only reason that I say that is because they were just children that were tricked by him, and yes, eventually they did start feeding into it themselves, and they were willing participants. So at the end of the day, they are just as bad as him, but at the same time, we also have to realize they were just children themselves that were taken advantage at one point of time by Croll, and tricked just like all the other young boys and men were when he came in contact with them. So, guys, let me know what you think. Do you think that Brooks and Henley are innocent? Do you think that they are just as bad as Croll? Let me know. But I'm going to go ahead and read one more statement on here, and then I'm going to come to the end and we're going to read his conviction and all of that. So on August 3rd, 1973, Croll killed his last victim, a 13-year-old boy from South Houston named James Stanton Dramala. Dramala was abducted by Croll while riding his bike in Pasadena and driven to Lamar Drive upon the pretense of collecting empty glass bottles to resell. At Croll's home, Dramala was tied to Croll's torture bed, raped, tortured, and strangled with a cord before being buried in the boat shed. Brooks later described Dramala as a small blonde boy for whom he had bought a pizza and in whose company he had spent 45 minutes at Croll's home before the youth was attacked. Give me 1 second, guys. Okay, so I know I said that was the last one, but I'm going to go ahead and read this too, and then the conviction and trial, and we'll close out. On the evening of August 7th, 1973, Henley invited 20-year-old Timothy Cordell Curley to attend a party at Croll's Pasadena residence. Curley, a casual acquaintance of Croll, who was intended to be his next victim, accepted the offer. Brooks was not present at the time, and the two youths arrived at Croll's house, where they sniffed paint fumes and drank alcohol until midnight before leaving the house, promising to return shortly. Henley and Curley then drove back to Houston Heights, and Curley parked his vehicle close to Henley's home. The two exited the vehicle, and Henley, hearing commotion across the street, emanating from the home of his 15-year-old friend Rhonda Louise Williams, walked toward her home. Williams, nursing a sprained ankle, had been beaten by her drunken father that evening and accepted Henley's invitation to join him and Curley at Croll's home. Williams climbed into the back seat of Curley's Volkswagen. The trio then drove towards Croll's Pasadena residence. At approximately 3 a.m. on the morning of August 8th, Henley and Curley, accompanied by Williams, returned to Croll's residence, and Croll was furious that Henley had brought a girl to his house, telling him in private that he had ruined everything. Henley explained that Williams had argued with her father that evening and did not wish to return home. Croll appeared to calm down and offered the trio beer and marijuana. The three teenagers began drinking and smoking marijuana, with Henley and Curley also sniffing paint fumes as Croll watched them intently. After approximately 2 hours, Henley, Curley, and Williams each passed out. The final confrontation. Henley awoke to find himself lying on his stomach and Croll snapping handcuffs onto his wrist. His mouth had been taped shut and his ankles had been bound together. Curley and Williams lay beside Henley, securely bound with nylon rope, gagged with adhesive tape, and lying face down on the floor. Curley had been stripped naked, noting Henley had awoken. Croll removed the gag from his mouth, and Henley protested in vain against Croll's actions, whereupon Croll reiterated that he was angry with Henley for bringing a girl to his house, that he intended to kill all three after he had assaulted and tortured Curley, initially saying, "Man, you blew it, bringing that girl," before shouting, "I'm gonna kill you all, but first I'm gonna have my fun." He then repeatedly kicked Williams in the chest before placing a transistor radio between her and Curley and turning the volume to maximum. Croll then lifted Henley to his feet and dragged him into the kitchen and placed a .22 caliber pistol against his stomach, threatening to shoot him. Henley calmed Croll, promising to participate in the torture and murder of both Williams and Curley if Croll released him. After approximately 30 minutes of discussion, Croll agreed and untied Henley, then carried Curley and Williams into his bedroom and tied them to opposite sides of his torture board. Curley on his stomach, Williams on her back. He then removed the adhesive tape from Curley's mouth before informing him of his intentions to look up his anus, as Henley again began inhaling paint fumes from a paper bag. Croll then handed Henley a hunting knife and ordered him to cut away Williams' clothes, insisting that while he would grape and kill Curley, Henley would do likewise to Williams. Henley began cutting away Williams' clothes as Croll undressed and began to assault and torture Curley. Both Curley and Williams had awakened by this point. Curley began writhing and shouting as Williams, whose gag Henley had removed, lifted her head and asked Henley, "Is this for real?" To which Henley answered, "Yes." Williams then asked Henley, "Are you going to do anything about it?" Croll's death. Henley then asked Croll whether he might take Williams into another room. Croll ignored him, and Henley then grabbed Coral's pistol, shouting, "You've gone too far, Dean." As Croll clambered off Curly, Henley elaborated, "I can't go on any longer. I can't have you kill all my friends." Croll approached Henley, saying, "Kill me, Wayne." Henley stepped back a few paces as Croll continued to advance upon him, shouting, "You won't do it." Henley then fired at Croll, hitting him in the forehead. The bullet failed to fully penetrate Coral's skull as he continued to lurch towards Henley, whereupon the youth fired another 2 rounds, hitting Coral in the left shoulder with one bullet penetrating Coral's lung and lodging into his spine. Coral began coughing up blood as he ran out of the room, trapping his right foot in a loose telephone wire and hitting the wall of the hallway. Henley fired 3 additional bullets into his lower back and shoulder as Coral slid down the wall in the hallway outside the room where the 2 other teenagers were bound. Coral died where he fell, his naked body facing the wall. Henley would recall that immediately after he shot Coral, the sole thought in his mind was that Coral would have been proud of the way he had behaved during the confrontation, adding that Coral had been training him to react quickly and forcefully, and that this was exactly what he had done. After Henley had shot Coral, he and Curly began weeping as Curly repeatedly thanked him for saving his life. Henley then released Curly and Williams from the torture boards, and all 3 teenagers dressed and discussed what actions they should take. Henley suggested to Curly and Williams that they should simply leave, to which Curly replied, "No, we should call the police." Henley agreed and looked up the number for the Pasadena Police Department in Coral's telephone directory. On August 8, 1973, at 8:24 a.m., Henley placed a call to the police, and his call was answered by an operator named Velma Lines. In his call, Henley blurted to the operator, "Y'all better come here right now. I just killed a man." Henley gave the address to operator as 2020 Lamar Drive, Pasadena. As Curly, Williams, and Henley waited outside Coral's home for the police to arrive, Henley mentioned to Curly that he had done that killing by shooting 4 or 5 times. Minutes later, a PPD patrol car arrived at 2020 Lamar Drive, and the 3 were sitting on the curb outside the house. The officer noted the .22 caliber pistol on the driveway near the trio, and 2 of the 3 were weeping. The officer observed the younger male slumped forward and rocking back and forth with his head in his hand, while weeping, as the sole female also weeping, draped one arm across his shoulder slightly, and the older male simply stared blankly across the street. The younger male identified himself as Elmer Wayne Henley and told the officer that he was the individual who had made the call and indicated that Coral's body was inside the house. After confiscating the pistol and placing Henley, Williams, and Curly inside the patrol car, the officer entered the bungalow and discovered Coral's body inside the hallway. The officer returned to the car and read Henley his Miranda rights. In response, Henley shouted, "I don't care who knows about it. I have to get it off my chest." Curly later told detectives that before the police officer had arrived at Lamar Drive, Henley had informed him, "If you wasn't my friend, I could have gotten $200 for you." In PPD custody, Henley was initially questioned about the killing of Coral. He recounted the events of the previous evening and that morning, explaining that he had shot Coral in self-defense. The statements given by Curly and Williams corroborated Henley's account, and the detectives questioning Henley believed he had indeed acted in self-defense. When questioned regarding his claim that as Coral had threatened him that morning, he had shouted that he killed several boys, Henley explained that for almost 3 years, Brooks and he had helped procure teenage boys, some of who had been their own friends, for Coral, who had raped and murdered them. Hindley gave a verbal statement stating he initially had believed the boys he had abducted were to be sold to a Dallas-based organization for homosexual acts, sodomy, maybe later killing, but soon learned Croll was himself killing the victims procured, and Hindley admitted he had assisted Croll in several abductions and murders and that he had actively participated in the torture and mutilation of 6 or 8 victims prior to the murder. Most victims had been buried at Lake Sam Rayburn and Highland Beach. Croll had paid up to $200 for each victim Brooks or he were able to lure to his apartment. Police were initially skeptical of Hindley's claims, assuming the sole homicide of the case was that of Croll, which they had ascribed as being the result of drug-filled fisticuffs, or I don't know how to say that, guys. It's fisticuffs that had turned deadly. Hindley was quite insistent, however, and upon his recalling the names of the 3 boys, Cobble, Hillgeist, and Jones, whom he stated he and Brooks had procured for Croll, the police accepted that there was something to his claims, as all 3 teenagers that he listed were listed as missing at Houston Police Department headquarters. Hillgeist had been reported missing in the summer of 1971, and the other 2 boys just 2 weeks. And the other 2 boys had just been missing for 2 weeks, I'm guessing, after that. Coral's Ford Incline van was parked in the driveway and conveyed a similar impression. The rear windows of the van were sealed by opaque blue curtains in the rear of the vehicle, and police found a coil of rope, a swatch of beige rug covered in soil stains, and a wooden crate with air holes drilled in the sides. The pre-board walls inside the rear of the van were rigged with several rings and hooks. Another wooden crate with air holes drilled in the sides was found in Croll's backyard. Inside the crate were several strands of human hair. On August 13th, a grand jury convened in Harris County to hear evidence against Hindley and Brooks. The first witnesses to testify were Williams and Curley, who testified to the events on August 7th and 8th leading to the death of Croll. Another witness who testified to his experience at the hands of Croll was William Ridinger, who recounted his abuse at Coral Schuler Street address before he was released. Also to testify at the hearing were the investigators who recounted the various statements and confessions provided by Hindley and Brooks in the days following Croll's death, and individuals tasked with supervising the exhumation of the victims' bodies. After listening to over 6 hours of testimony, on August 14th, the grand jury indicted Hindley on 3 counts of murder and Brooks on 1 count. Bail for each youth was set to $100,000, and Hindley was not charged with the death of Croll, which prosecutors would ultimately rule on September 18 had been committed in self-defense. By the time the grand jury had completed its investigation, I'm sorry, guys, Hindley had been indicted for 6 murders and Brooks for 4. Both would later reject pre-trial offers presented to them by Assistant District Attorney Don Lambright of life sentences in exchange for pleas of guilty to the murders for which they had been indicted. A pretrial motion that Hindley undergo a psychiatric examination to determine whether he was mentally competent to stand trial was also opposed by his attorney, Charles Melder, upon the grounds the ruling would violate Hindley's constitutional rights. Elmer Wayne Hindley and David Owen Brooks were tried separately for their roles in murders. Hindley was brought to trial before Judge Preston Dial in San Antonio on July 1, 1974, charged with 6 murders committed between March of 1972 and July of 1973. Upon advice from his defense counsel, Hindley did not take the stand to testify. His attorney, William Gray, did cross-examine several witnesses, but did not call any witnesses or experts to the defense. The prosecution called 24 witnesses, including Curley and Rittinger, and introducing 82 pieces of evidence, including Croll's torture board and one of the boxes used to transport the victims. Inside the box, police had found hair which examiners testified came from both Cobble and Henley. Other incriminating testimony came from police officers who read from Henley's written statements. In one part of his confession, Henley had described luring two of the victims for whose murder he had been brought to trial, Cobble and Jones, to Croll's Pasadena residence. Henley had confessed that after their initial abuse and torture at Croll's home, Cobble and Jones each had one wrist and ankle bound to the same side of Croll's torture board. The youth were then forced by Croll to fight each other with the promise that the one who beat the other to death would be allowed to live. After they spent several hours beating each other, Jones was tied to a board and forced to watch Cobble again be assaulted, tortured, and shot to death before he himself was again raped, tortured, and strangled with the Venetian blind cord. Cobble and Jones were killed on July 27, 1973, and 2 days after they had been reported missing. Several victims' parents had to leave the courtroom to regain their composure as police and medical examiners described how their relatives were tortured and murdered. On July 15, 1974, both counsels presented their closing arguments to the jury, adding that this was the most extreme example of man's inhumanity to man they had ever seen. District Attorney Carol Vance apologized for his not being able to seek the death penalty. The jury deliberated for 92 minutes before finding Henley guilty of all 6 murders for which he was tried. The following day, July 16th, the formal procedures to sentence Henley for the 6 guilty verdicts began, and on August 8th, Judge Preston Dial ordered that Henley serve each 99-year sentence consecutively, totaling to 594 years, and he was transferred to the Huntsville unit to formally begin his sentence. Now, let's get to Brooks. His trial lasted less than 1 week, and the jury deliberated for just 90 minutes before they reached a verdict. He was found guilty of Lawrence's murder on March 4th of 1975 and sentenced to life imprisonment. Brooks showed no emotion at the sentence as the sentence was passed, although his wife burst into tears. Brooks also appealed his sentence, contending that the signed confession used against him were taken without him being informed of his legal rights, but his appeal was dismissed May of 1979. Now, guys, there's so much more to unpack from this. There's a lot of information. However, we are at 58 minutes, and we did tell you guys in a previous video that right now, since we're recording off of another phone, the storage is what we're having issues with. So anything longer than like an hour and 10 minutes or 15 minutes at most is going to not let us be able to edit and upload it to YouTube. So I'm so sorry, guys, that I had to cut this short. I really feel for all the victims and their families. This man was disgusting, and these 2 young men who helped him were just as bad as him. I want to say that a part of me wants to feel for the 2 accomplices, not in every aspect, but I feel like that man really did take advantage of them, and by offering them money, they kind of, I don't know, they were just really young, and I feel like in a way they were taken advantage of as well. But at the end of the day, they still chose to keep doing it, and they knew what they were doing after a while was wrong, but continued. So I do not feel sorry for them, and I feel like they deserve to be in jail for the rest of their lives. I do want to do a deeper dive and actually get to talk about all of the victims and see if I can pull any other information that might have not been listed on here. But like I said, if you guys want more on this case and you want me to cover more details on it, please let me know, guys. Also, we have a lot of people watching us that are not subscribed. So please, 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 if you can, subscribe and interact with our videos by liking and sharing with your friends, your family, or, you know, whoever. And just let us know if there's anything that we can improve on. I know sometimes we're all over the place and we're just, sometimes, I don't know, we're all over the place sometimes, is just what I'm trying to say. But we are just starting. We've only been doing this for a few months. So with time, we hope to get better and we hope to make our content better. If you would like something different or you would like us to, you know, take any kind of advice that you could give us, please leave a comment down below and let us know. We do accept criticism and we do not mind you guys expressing to us how you feel. So, with that being said, just continue to spread peace, love, and positivity. We love you guys, and we will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching, and have a good day or night, wherever you are, and whenever you're watching this, and we will see you in the next video. Bye.
Cruising down the highway, windows down low. Sunset paints the sky in a fiery glow. Mountains